The disappointing season for the Brooklyn Nets came to an end, but Kyrie Irving has commentary that should bolster the Nets fan base to feel like it's all going to be on track, whether or not the superstar should be taken seriously or as red flags of concern in what will be a big offseason for Brooklyn coming up. And we break it down right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie, owner, operator, DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, FanDuel, DraftKings. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht covering the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, Doug. And as we said, the Brooklyn Nets got swept out of the first round of the playoffs at the hands of the Boston Celtics. We knew. Lot to discuss in this offseason, but we didn't know how quickly we could have a conversation around a superstar in Kyrie Irving and just offering a bit of an insight into how he'll be approaching making some adjustments to this roster.
Well, it took all about 30 minutes for the season to end for someone to say something that makes your, eyebrows raise a little bit and thinking, what's going on here? And it all stems from Kyrie Irving's press conference that he did following the game, where, before we get to what he said, I will say there was clear disappointment on his part. I did think for the most part, he gave some really sort of honest, reflected answers on what happened. He had talked about, being a distraction for the team over the course of the season, and maybe he felt bad about that. I don't know if it's even worth it to go back and relitigate that whole thing, because that one's just in the can, but he did at least acknowledge it. And he was despondent in the loss, saying it felt bad. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I do think before he get to the part where, you do start to throw some question marks up around what he's saying or what his thought process is around the team, I do want to just at least acknowledge that, sometimes these moments are hard. You're not caught off guard, but you have a lot of emotion. You're tired. You can say things, but I do think there was a relative sadness in sort of what he spoke about, at least to start.
I think that's, as I said before we get to the other side of it, is that we've always, when you talk about Kyrie Irving, he's nothing if not honest. Now, whether or not the responses or his commentary is always the most well thought out, or whether or not it rubs you the wrong way or doesn't resonate with the fan base or basketball players and pundits alike, that can be a different thing. But Kyrie Irving is an open book, as deep as you want to go into his mind. And to your point, I said it after game number 2 and going to game 3 and 4 that these guys just didn't seem like they were fully invested in it. I take that back in the sense that I've heard Kyrie say before, we've heard Kevin Durant say before, they want to win. They want to win championships. It's just sometimes the play on the court doesn't always correlate. And then sometimes the commentary afterwards doesn't give you the sense that they're fully invested all of the time.
Yeah. And so then we get later into the conversation where he's asked about sort of the plans for the offseason and where the direction of the team is going now. So just a little context around this to start. Kyrie Irving has a player option for $36.5 million. He did not sign an extension at the beginning of the season, most likely related to the vaccine status at the time and just not knowing. No one knew how that was going to play out in the time where they originally had talked about he and Harden and KD all signing together. Kevin Durant did sign the extension. Kyrie still just has the player option. He would be eligible this offseason for a 4-year, a 5-year for $246 million max contract if the Nets were to offer that. So that's just the context around where they stand in terms of contracts. So he's asked this question around what the future looks like. And he says, when I say I'm here with Kevin Durant, I think that really entails us managing this franchise together alongside Joe Tsai, the owner, and Sean Marks, and just our group of family members that we have in our locker room in our organization. So the key word that had everyone, again, eyebrow raising here
Family.
is managing what's that?
Family. No, sorry.
No, I mean, yeah, but it's managing the organization.
Yep.
Like, this is the part where is it a little out of context of what he's talking about? kind of, but it's clearly like how he views himself and Kevin Durant, because he puts those two guys right in line with Sean Marks and Joe Tsai, the GM and the owner, as stakeholders in how the organization can be managed. And if it was just one comment from Kyrie, I think it'd be like, okay, it's in the heat of the moment. Except he said stuff like this before, where there are going to be lots of different coaches when Nash is first hired. And there's going to be lots of different coaches, right? It's not going to Nash is going to be the coach. They're all going to be a little bit of a coach. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like what? And then this one where he says that in his mind, he's there to help manage the organization along with the owner and the GM. What's your reaction to this? It's like so perplexing and tone deaf to me, but maybe I'm overreacting.
Well, in the moment, in the moment, it's tone deaf to the sense of, man, you just got swept. Everything about this season, right? It's all in the bag of what went wrong here. And it's enough just to say, man, we're super bummed out. We want to get this thing back on track. We're committed to doing that. And you could leave it there and it's fine. The funny thing, I think, I said tongue in cheek there, family being the one that raises your eyebrow. I do think that authentically Kyrie Irving views it as like, hey, like we're all a family in this. We're all in this thing together. And as a family, everyone has a voice. Like everyone is a part of this thing. Now, obviously, lower down the roster and all that kind of stuff. From it, who knows where he thinks Steve Nash fits in that hierarchy or players?
Not mentioned, by the way.
And the thing of it is like, especially even just inside of this season, let alone everything else. Because by the way, if Kevin Durant came out and said the exact same thing in the post game, you wouldn't even bat an eye at it. One, because he's the best player on the team. And two, because he hasn't given you this long sample size of saying things that make you raise your eyebrow. So because it comes from Kyrie, that makes it land a little bit differently. And I just don't know. This feels like someone that gets to speak his mind freely because he's been put in that position predicated on going all the way back to when they signed him. It was the tipping point for getting Kevin Durant and then moving forward. There's no need for an off switch for Kyrie Irving. He is an untouchable player inside of being Kevin Durant's boy. And that's what I think leads to him being able to speak his mind so freely in these moments. And I know I'm going deeper quicker than I should. It sounds tone deaf. It doesn't sound like you're really there to give the fans what they want. Just be dejected, want to get it right, feel bad about it, and say, and we'll be back again to talk to you soon. Like you don't have to go the layer deeper here.
Yeah, and I think that's more what speaks to the broader problem, right? Like the broader problem with this team. And I'm going to read another quote that he had here that kind of lays a little bit more of a foundation for that. This might not even been an offhand comment, that he really believes that this is like his duty or his, the idea that he is going to be there to help put the pieces together for this team. Now, look, do superstars run teams to some degree? Sure. Like we've seen this multiple times. Not all do this, but you get at a high enough level in the NBA and you have a certain status that can dictate sort of what the front office is. We just saw this go through with the Lakers. We've seen LeBron do this at multiple stops along the way. Sometimes it works. Often it doesn't. When the player has like the loudest voice in the room in terms of roster management, it typically doesn't end well. It's how you get guys like DeAndre Jordan at a big contract, right? Like this, we have examples of how this can go wrong. It's how the Lakers get Russell Westbrook. Like it just doesn't always work. And there's a reason there needs to be a disconnect between the front office and the players, because the front office can sometimes be analytical in a way that the players can't be. That's fine. Like they're not, and you should have input, right? Like if you don't like somebody and if you're the best player, there should definitely be input. It's hilarious to me that Kyrie sees himself as that guy, like based on question mark. Like, I don't know like why he would think that.
Yeah. And coming up here in a second, we're going to get to, as Doug says, more comments from Kyrie Irving, but also why Kevin Durant holds a little bit of responsibility when you hear these comments from Kyrie Irving, as he is the best player in this organization and ultimately the decision maker when it comes to what's going to happen going forward. But first, we'll tell you about our friends over at Shady Rays. You know that I've told you about these guys before on the show. That's because Shady Rays is an independent sunglass company that gives you the features of a $200 pair of shades for a fraction of the price. It means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, premium, high-end finishes. Also, something you're not going to find anywhere else, and that's that Shady Rays has an insane protection program where they will include a lost or broken protection on every single pair that you purchase. They'll send you a brand new pair if you lose them. No matter what happens, give them a try. You're going to love them. And if you don't, guess what? You'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America for every single pair of Shady Rays that are purchased. It's a win-win, sometimes even win scenario for you, Shady Rays, and your eyes. That's how you get the 3 levels there. You head over to shadyrays.com right now and use promo code Locked On, and you're going to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for the best deal of the season. 50% off on 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. So let's go then into these additional comments here, Doug. Round it out first before I legitimately think that for whatever Kyrie Irving is and what he says and how whatever ownership he thinks he can take of the Brooklyn Nets, it's yes on him, and it also in large part is on Kevin Durant.
Okay, so he goes on to say, in terms of further along this quote, he says, "When I say I'm here with Kevin, oh, sorry, I read the one. Sorry, he said, so it's not just about me and Kev. I don't want to make it just about that. We are," because he kind of catches himself here, I think, by mentioning only those 2 players and kind of none of the other players or the coach. So there was a little bit of a backtrack here. And when he says that, like I said, when so it's not just about me and Kev. Don't want to make it just about that. We are cornerstones here, but we have a few other guys that are on contract. Does not mention any of those players. And then I think we got to make some moves this offseason, really talk about it, really be intentional about what we're building, have some fun with it, and make it enjoyable. It's like, this is the other part where,
said the same thing pre-trade around Jared Allen and other guys back then too, if you remember. Like he said, yeah, there's some guys maybe, and specifically only mentioned a couple of dudes and left a lot of other names off that list.
He briefly mentions Ben Simmons a little bit later, but that is kind of in a passing off, just kind of fashion. Joe Harris, just into context around this too. Joe Harris is still under contract for 2 more seasons. Seth Curry is still under contract for 1 more season. Patty Mills has a player option. It'll be interesting to see what that happens there. And then they have the young guys. Everyone else, like Bruce Brown, he's a unrestricted free agent. And Claxton. And Claxton too. So, and then Dragic is on the minimum. So who knows what's going to happen with these guys? Most of these guys probably aren't going to be back, especially the older ones. Regardless, the mentioning of like bringing in like new players and building this other stuff, again, it's so tone deaf around like, having to bring in the guys that you want to have like play with, right? Or like it also kind of implies that the team wasn't built correctly already, right? Like that
this wasn't good. And we'll get there.
And maybe it wasn't, right? But the implication, the things that this implies are no one did it correctly before, right? Like it needs to be done with more input. It can be done better the second time around.
Yep.
And we're going to have fun doing it or whatever. Again, I don't think this is making a mountain out of a molehill because of what we've already discussed with this guy, that he, in some ways, I love watching Kyrie on the basketball court as much as anybody else. It has happened for 100 games over the first 3 seasons for a variety of reasons. And the track record at this point just becomes this sort of never-ending, head-scratching moments around the guy where each one on their own is not a big deal. And each one on their own can be explained, right? Like we've just seen this along the way. If you take each thing and put it in a vacuum, all of it looks fine, or there's plenty of reasons around it, or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It's when you take a look at the whole, you start to wonder, this is what you start to wonder. Is this the guy you want to pay a max contract to for the next 5 years at max money based on what you already know about all the other stuff, not the basketball stuff, all the other stuff? Like, is this, or the Nets just, or do they have no choice? Because I would love to know in their quieter moments what to do here, or if it's just super easy because it's like Kevin Durant and this is where we're going, right? Like, is it just that easy? Because there's enough things here where you can say could be a long 5 years if you end up doing it this way. Again, only based on the track record we've already seen with Kyrie Irving for the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to some of the players he didn't mention, and just again, you mentioned hasn't played under 100 games, right? 27 points, career high, basically average over the 3 seasons in Brooklyn, while narrowly getting over 1 season of games
Sorry, it's
before this game.
103 games.
Right.
Just to
I
okay.
get it. You're 20 games over a season, so represents some playoffs in basketball, etc. But to your point, and why I think that Kevin Durant holds responsibility here. We all understand you signed Kyrie because it was going to get you Kevin Durant. Now, as we see it and understand it, Steve Nash is there because Kevin Durant wanted him to be the head coach. Now, it's this weird kind of butting of heads here, because on the one hand we say Kyrie Irving is Kevin Durant's boy, they're attached at the hip. But the second that Steve Nash gets hired, Kyrie comes out with yeah, we're all coaches here. And then he tries to walk that back. Go back to, if you remember, I think it was IG Live or whatever, when Kyrie was saying, yeah, maybe we get some shots. Maybe I'm doing it. Maybe I'm getting my layups, my looks, my jumpers. And Kevin Durant was like, hey, buddy, take it all easy here. Maybe we'll all just work that out on the court. Where like,
Real quick, he specifically talked about going. He was going to get like 5 post-ups a game, or
yes,
something like that. He was going to get
right.
He was going to get a certain amount of post-ups a game, and Kevin Durant was like, "What?"
Like, let's just backtrack this here a little bit, friend. You'll get there. We'll all get there. But that's what it feels like a little bit, like kid brother mentality of like, yeah, easy there, big fella. And the
Right.
question that it comes down to is, now, to your point, is this a guy in Kyrie Irving that you want to commit $246 million to? And it's really, it's multi-pronged. Yes, he's an incredibly talented player if he's going to be on the court. But what would you accomplish with that amount of money around Kevin Durant, who you already have under contract? And it really comes down to, if you're Sean Marks, do you even have that ability to go to Kevin Durant and say, we're in the off season, we know we have a lot of big decisions to make. Is it worth it for me to ask you how you feel about Kyrie or some other possibilities of what this could look like? If you tell me, Kevin, that this is it and you want him here, don't even worry about it. It's not a second thought. We're signing him. Here we go. But if I can lay out a path for you, as I've shown in my past year, if I'm Sean Marks, I've shown what I can do with a roster. I found Joe Harris off a scrap heap. I reclamated and got Spencer Dinwiddie paid, right? Like, I stole Bruce Brown from the Detroit Pistons. Like, I can do things to make us a highly competitive championship level team around you. Is that an option? And my guess is Sean Marks doesn't even bother asking that question, but it should be something that you can somehow get to at least touching on here, because I can just paint a lot of different pictures about what this looks like. And at the very least, if you can't say that and you can't have that discussion, then that's on Kevin Durant as well, because you cannot be with blinders on around how Kyrie Irving is impacting your chances to win championships over the back end of your career.
Yeah, and look, I think we would still agree that from a basketball perspective, that strictly basketball, I still think Kyrie Irving is worth that money, right? Like, and I'm not even talking. I think it's pretty easy, and just the way the salaries are structured now, I think the money to some, frankly, it's more the years. Like, it's more the number of years that you might be signing up for it. Rather than the money, because the money's the money. These teams have to spend the money anyway. I know there's cap and there's luxury tax, and it's like, I think that's not as germane to the conversation, but I get it, because it's a massive number, right? Like, $250 million. But all right, but there's a few other things I want to respond to about what you said around the Kevin Durant piece too, because I think in some ways it's super easy, I think, and in other ways it's a little more difficult to wrap your head around about where they are. And just talk a little bit more about Kyrie Irving as well. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar at this point, I don't know what you're reaching for. When it comes to snacking, you cannot be reaching for the candy bar. You can't be reaching for the chips and stuff like that. You got to get some protein in you. You got to get the Built Bar that started with the flavors to make sure that they tasted great, that didn't taste like those other protein bars that you might be used to that kind of have that spongy cardboard feel. No, not with Built Bar. 100% covered in chocolate. Like I said, they got flavors like mint brownie, coconut, almond, white chocolate, cookies, and cream. And they have the stats to back it up from a health perspective. Just 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. It's a low-calorie, high-protein snack that can help even replace meals. If you're looking to stay healthy, you go to Built.com. You use the promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
So just quickly before we get back into the Kevin Durant piece of this, because I don't want to lose track of this. When Kyrie Irving leaves off certain names and doesn't mention certain guys, and then you go look at games played, like, I'm specifically going to talk about just Bruce Brown here. This is a guy that played 65 and 72 games for you over the last 2 seasons, started 37 and 45 respectively, turned it on and effectively helped get you across the line here to be in the play-in games and to get out of it and to even be in the playoffs while you were sometimes available, not available. That again is just a microcosm of being absent-minded around. Like, if you're going to have the conversation, then you better mention everybody. You better highlight the effort that a lot of guys gave over the course of this season and how difficult it was to not see it culminate in a better fashion, as opposed to say, we think we got some pieces here, whatever, and it's already a red flag around whether or not will Bruce Brown be back. Well, if you take Kyrie's post-game comments to mean anything, he may not even be giving a second thought around a player that Brooklyn Nets fans look at and say, this guy can be really valuable to this team. So I know we want to stay on Kevin Durant, but this is why it's frustrating.
This is what again, what goes back to the problem, like how problematic statements are like this. And why I don't believe that we're just overreacting to something. This is, by the way, this basically became a national story immediately. Now, part of that is because, and Kyrie Irving, mentioned this, the media loves to really hound him. That I believe that to be true. Also, I think there are probably times he does not get fair shakes in the media because he messages different than a lot of other players, and that turns a lot of people off. And I totally get that. And that has people have, a slanted opinion of him, which I think at times has been unfair. So I'm on board with all these ideas around like sort of how the media has treated Kyrie. I don't think at times he's helped himself all that much. I don't think he cares all that much about helping himself around that. So I don't think that he's losing sleep over it by any means. But it is funny when you single out yourself and then some other key people as cornerstone people in the organization. You do sort of label by omission other guys on the team in an odd way. This is why it's problematic to start talking like this, right? Because the second you start talking like this, it becomes as much about the people you don't mention also, right? And it just puts everyone in a weird spot. Now, look, we also know Kyrie Irving, it has like a near universal approval rate among players from what we've heard, especially teammates. Like, guys love him. We've mentioned this multiple times. He's, high up in the players union, which you don't get if you're not liked. Like, players love being around him. They think he's awesome. I get it. So maybe he's just able to say stuff like this and players just like, yeah, that's cool. It's Kyrie. Like, maybe there's an understanding in the locker room more about him than I'm privy to. But I just find it to be so problematic from an organizational standpoint to look at this situation and say, well, now do we have to pre-approve everything through Kyrie Irving going forward? Or is he going to throw us under the bus later because like the moves didn't make out? Is it reading too much into that situation? Sean Marks and these guys just don't care because they know what they've signed up for at this point, and they're just like, hey, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. It's very weird to get a handle on.
Well, and that's, when we talked about with Matt Brooks ahead of, it was after game 2, ahead of game 3, going into game 4, it was around like the Steve Nash piece and what's going to happen. We're going to get to this offseason here, but it's like, when you think about, well, what's going to happen with Steve Nash? Should Sean Marks be under scrutiny here? The players on the roster and how they're utilized, everything goes through this filter of like, I don't know, how much can I judge something that has to go through a Kyrie Irving filter first? That's the issue that you keep running into. How am I going to? Steve Nash could be a terrible coach. I wouldn't be able to say for sure if apparently Kyrie Irving might be doing some of the play calling, or when we get in those ISO situations, you can't wrap your head around why things don't look differently. And when it comes to offseason decisions now, and the way Kyrie Irving sometimes comes off, what is my expectation supposed to be about what the next sign the contract in the next 4 years, sign a 1-and-1 because you're worried about it? This franchise, and we know you sign up for this, but you mentioned the Lakers at the top of the show. LeBron James has gone through a lot of different iterations of being a part of different organizations and having a very big voice. Now, he's been successful in that. He's also made some big mistakes. This last season seems to be a glaring example of it. But I think you need to prove that you're capable of operating to some level in that capacity before you start speaking like you've already achieved it on that level. And that's the way Kyrie Irving talks. Full ownership of what goes on without necessarily the track record. His track record is, whether through the media, sometimes with fans, or with his own decision-making, this is a guy that is influenced by the moment, that is very in touch with how he feels moment to moment. And that's a very dangerous way to be having influence over a franchise, because that is not how teams are built, on moment to moment. They're built on long-term perspectives, something that Sean Marks proved he's capable of. And seemingly, as fans have now talked about, the speculation is, has Sean Marks lost his ability to be a GM? No, I think there's very clear X factors that change what he's been able to do. And Kyrie's one of them. And again, Kevin Durant is also a part of this. And maybe it's just that he's less vocal, that the ire falls less on him.
Yeah, and with Kevin Durant, you mentioned Nash too. Like Kevin Durant had given sort of the Nash seal of approval, so I think he'll be back. Right? Like, and I think that sometimes you can read into these comments and just say kind of know what the decision's going to be. The other thing too with Kyrie, and I wouldn't be shocked if we saw this either, is that he has a track record of also walking the stuff back later because he speaks very freely in the moment, and we had multiple examples. Like he walked back on, he basically apologized or said it was silly, the post up thing that we mentioned before. He essentially apologized for the Steve Nash. There'll be multiple coaches later on after that, and said I shouldn't have said that. He said that there was some regret around how he handled his exit in Cleveland, basically saying that he shouldn't have done it that way. Like later, we do hear him voice some regret around things he said. I wouldn't be shocked if we got that in this case also. And so what were you gonna say?
No, because it's two parts. One, Kyrie Irving also has a track record of, while being apologetic around mistakes that he's made, whether how he's spoken or choices that he's made. You also have a track record, though, that like you're a guy that's prone to make mistakes. Like you are a guy that's prone to regret things that you've decided. And just from the big picture level of, you said about, is Kyrie Irving worth the money from a basketball perspective? Yes. But what is the guarantee? Like right now in this moment, we assume, well, he's buddies with Kevin Durant and he's committed to this thing here. There's no guarantee that in a year from now, he doesn't feel that same way anymore. And he's frustrated by things that he's not going to take responsibility for, but he may not want to be a part of it. And now all of a sudden you're left with an asset that probably has already diminished value. When you talk about what would, market value be for Kyrie Irving if he just walked out there, would teams want him? Certainly, but there'd be a lot of questions to answer. And that's, I think, the piece that you have to wonder. And I saw us seeing Doug's reaction on YouTube. It's like automatically assuming that teams would want Kyrie Irving. There's a world where it's like only the Brooklyn Nets want him. Yeah. And maybe that changes the narrative around, I know you can opt out and you can go max dollars here. Maybe we have a dollar amount that we feel comfortable about taking the risk reward of Kyrie Irving being on Brooklyn.
Yeah, Zach Lowe mentioned this on a podcast that posted earlier on Tuesday with Bobby Marks, and I'm not going to go into everything he said, but he does make the comment around Kyrie that the Nets now have two of like essentially this. I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, like the most untradeable guys at these contract numbers, right? Because especially if they sign Kyrie to the extension, because like they have to basically pay them this number, but by paying it, there's like no trade value at all for these guys because no team is ever going to unload assets for Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons at this point. So like they weirdly have they're going to have these two contracts that they're going to just be not stuck with because it can work. There's a world where this can definitely work. Like the Simmons plus Durant, Kyrie, in theory,
can up there in championship odds, and
can work. Yep. Can work, but we just have no evidence of it right now. And when you're the Nets, like what else do you do? Like you can never, even if you wanted to, like I just don't even know what you would. The pivots are equally not as good in some ways, right? Because there's free agents, there's fallout from Kevin Durant, like there's too many other things. And we'll have more idea around this as we get into the offseason, because the offseason will start to flesh itself out in terms of contracts, and we will know what happens with Kyrie. Like we'll have some definitive answers around this. I suspect saying this about this extension, that there's great feeling around him that it's been discussed already. So like it probably is a done deal. But it is funny though, like to have these two contracts, they're going to have these two guys that are like, hey man, in theory, basketball wise, this could totally work. There's also a world where it has an implosion factor way higher than almost any other than any other situation. Like the most in the league, like the most walking on eggshells situation in the entire league by having these two guys on your team for the next 5 years. And by the way, two guys, I mean Simmons and Kyrie.
Yes, yeah, right. Not Kevin Durant. But that's some of the brightest stars, right? The reason why they burn so bright is because they're on the verge of exploding here. And I just think, again, it probably would feel different if we're coming out of the third year, right? That's the difference here too. This wasn't year one and there's some strange comments. This is year 3. And that's where that prospect of signing up for a long-term run with Kyrie Irving in this organization is like, so you want 7 years of this, results be what they may. And we are in the offseason here. We'll start to get into the construction of the roster, where things went right or wrong for them, the pieces that you want to have around these guys. Well, boy, is it a daunting task to wrap my head around having this big of a question mark at two key players at big dollar amounts going into another year and saying, if we did this last episode, if, yeah, right. And I got 13 butts right in behind that. And
Yep.
if this is the way that they go, there's going to still be a lot more of those scenarios to play out over the offseason and going into next year. So we'll be here though. We'll be here riding this thing out, and certainly not lacking for content and discussion.
And like, and by the way, where you just got swept. It wasn't, you didn't lose in game 7 of the finals, and now we need to get over the hump. You just got swept by the Celtics
Right.
where they like kind of only half broke a sweat, right? In doing it. So okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We'll be back. Don't worry. We'll be back. But that just immediately sparked 1,000 other thoughts.
The great news, right? I was gonna say the great news on the Nets from this perspective is that Adam and I we'll get out of here after this, but Adam and I talked, it's always a little imposing or daunting when the team that you cover gets, is out of it, because it's always easier to talk about basketball than to talk about speculation, right? And so like that's fans like basketball because you want to watch basketball. That's what we like talking about too. So there's always a little bit of nervousness around. Okay, let's come 5 days a week. We're gonna talk the Nets. It took, like I said, like 30 seconds into to be like, all right, there's never not going to be a story here. So that's the good news. There's going to be a full season of this. All right. Make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast. We just did our 2 biggest numbers ever in terms of the podcast and YouTube. And so we're really so appreciative. Just like I said, 2 biggest days in Locked On Nets history were the first 2 days. Make this 3 in a row. Like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and over on YouTube.
And great comments from people appreciating us doing the show. And we say it everywhere on social media. We'll say it here as well. We appreciate everyone coming and supporting it. So it's been awesome. We got a whole offseason filled with this. We've used this quote before, my friends, but hey, Sean Marks, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's the definition of insanity. Albert Einstein.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.